I'm sure the reason will become apparent when we take it apart. Now that I know it's working, I think we should give it a clean with a healthy dose of eucalyptus oil. This computer has been sitting in my shed for a few weeks now, and I've been simply itching to clean it off. Just look at how much dirt is built up on top. The permanent marker on top suggests this computer was number 39 with a Pentium 4 processor and 2 GB of RAM. After letting the eucalyptus oil soak in, it began to lift the writing. I continued to spray on a small amount, removing a bit more each time, and finally it was gone. There were a few tough stains on top which came out pretty easily with some Ajax spray and wipe. Now we get to see the real shade of white that this outer casing has. The Nvidia FX 5200 was a pretty average graphics card, even when it came out in 2003. I made sure to take photos of how all the front panel LEDs and switches were plugged into the motherboard, as it will save some time when I go to reassemble it. I remember identical Apex computers back when I went to primary school. They even had the same DVD-ROM drive. And here's the 40GB Samsung SpinPoint hard drive I installed Windows XP on. It was manufactured back in July of 2002. The power supply looks to be mini ATX. Not only is it small, the output is only 200 watts. And after removing 2 Phillips head screws, the motherboard can be pushed back and lifted out of the case. The front bezel was also easy to unclip. This thankfully isn't directly attached to the LEDs or switches. Apex created a single board that handles the front I/O and powers the stereo speakers on the front of the case. To control the volume, there's a sizable pot, which is short for potentiometer, a type of variable resistor. Quite a bit of dust had built up behind the front plastic, and one of the clips had a big crack in it. On the front, there were a number of marks that suggested it was moved around a lot. Using some cut and polish, I tried to remove the marks or at least reduce their visibility. Plastics like this are prone to scrapes, and thankfully, with a bit of time and effort, come up looking pretty clean. With all the components removed, I could finally dust out the case, which was now very light. The bottom still had all the feet. It's pretty common for at least one of these to fall off after nearly 20 years. These do appear to be glued on, and they have shifted slightly. A bit of Ajax got all the years worth of grime off though. The rear of the machine will need a bit more work. I took off the PCI covers and I/O shield, which are looking pretty grimy. To straighten the corner that was dented in, I simply bent the metal with a pair of pliers. The fact that this was out of place probably explains why the case didn't fit on all that well. The surface of the metal had begun to tarnish. I applied some cut and polish to sand it off. Off camera, I ended up doing a few more passes, which definitely helped. You'll see in the end of the video. This motherboard is actually made by Intel. The 2GB of DDR memory in this system has a clock speed of 400 MHz, but the motherboard can only run as fast as 266, so the RAM is also throttled in a sense. Now we get a look at exactly what the processor is. Clearly it's not the original 2 GHz one, and once the thermal paste is cleaned off, I can see that it is a 2.8 GHz SL6C5, 1-core, 2-thread Pentium 4. So this CPU has an 800 MHz frontside bus, while this motherboard only supports frontside buses of 400 and 533 MHz with certain CPUs, essentially meaning the CPU is downclocked to half its speed, hence why it's only showing up as 1.4 GHz instead of 2.8. Looking on eBay, I did find a good replacement CPU that'll fit at a later date. It's pretty funny that someone went to the effort of upgrading the original 2 GHz CPU only for the system to run at an even lower 1.4 GHz speed. Either way, the cooling system that's in here should adequately cool the P4. With a generous application of thermal paste, the heatsink can go back on. And after letting the metal I/O shield sit in some Ajax spray and wipe, it looks a whole lot cleaner. This did a great job at lifting the grease and unwanted material. Just remember how bad it looked before. While the machine is apart, I thought I'd also clean off the graphics card. Released in early 2003, the FX 5200 features 128 MB of DDR video memory. The suggested retail price was only $69.99. GPU prices have definitely increased quite a bit since then. A new application of thermal paste is always a good idea, although this chip never really ran that hot considering it didn't require a fan. To clean off the tarnished backplate, I unscrewed it from the VGA and DVI ports, and left it to soak in some spray and wipe. While that was happening, I went over the other ports on the motherboard to try and remove some of the corrosion that had built up. And there we have a very clean looking GPU. Since the clock battery has died, I simply replaced it with another CR2032. These batteries are very cheap and easy to find online. The front bezels of the DVD-ROM drive haven't yellowed, they're just a bit dirty. I let them soak in some spray and wipe, which should remove the grime caused by constant touching. There was a bit of a scrape that came off with the use of some cut and polish, and normally I'd replace the eject mechanism's drive belt, but this one uses a series of gears connected directly to the motor. That's looking a whole lot cleaner. The power supply has also accumulated its fair share of dust. It sucks in air from inside the system and blows it out the back. I gave it a dust off to remove any built up inside. Always be very careful not to touch any exposed circuitry with your bare hand, and that's looking quite dust-free once again. Now here comes the fun part, reassembling this old desktop. I made my best effort to tuck away the cables as neatly as possible, but this case wasn't exactly made with cable management in mind. I did use some cable ties as well, but there's only so much you can do. And here's the result of my work, a much cleaner looking desktop. While there's nothing remarkable about this machine, it's cool to see it looking new once again. The Apex brand had been around in Australia since the early 80s, and at its peak employed over 700 people. And